Hi guys, welcome to lecture 2 of the white paper sequence. There's going to be 3 of these all together. I'm going to do a little overview of what we've done in the past and then move forward. This week I'm going to talk about abstracts, executive summaries, and introductions. Those 3 things. And we'll talk a little bit again about visual design, which we talked about and covered last week, but we'll cover some examples this week as well. Remember that each and every one of your white papers will be completely different. So all of these things that we discuss, you have to kind of weigh and go, all right, which are the things that are most effective for the type of thing, the information that I'm purveying for my audience. So you have to make some design executive decisions. Okay. All right, so document design. If you'll recall, both from your reading and from the video last week that we touched on this information, this is all about the design choices that you make. Some of them work for some things, some of them don't work for others. So you're going to take a look at the examples that I provide for you, and you'll have to decide which ones work best for your particular project. Some things that you may be aware of, again, look at the design white space. We call it white space, even though this is blue here. This design is the type of text, the space, the graphics. The information here is meant to be both professional but also easy on the eye to preview really quickly. We need this information in your white paper to be accessible to an outsider. So not just someone who's in your field, recall, but someone like myself who is an educated but in a different field. So you have to work really hard at making this white paper be accessible to that person. It also might be used in marketing. So you might be getting audience members from all kinds of different areas, and you have to be responsible for making your information accessible and readable and understandable to all of those people. You don't want to make something too daunting so they just go up. Don't want to read that, right? All right, so in visuals, we talked about the CARP principle, C-A-R-P, CARP. Those are contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity. Contrast is easy. Although it's not always used very easily by people, naturally speaking, but that's how the contrast between light and dark, black and white, light yellow versus dark blue. It makes it easy for the eye to read something, to take in the information, which is important for your audience. Alignment, this is how balanced something looks. We're going to talk about that as we move along. You're going to have to make some choices on that, on what balance and how that works. Repetition, whatever you choose here as sort of a thematic design thing that goes through your paper, you want it to be consistent. You want to repeat the same colors, repeat the same design, repeat the same font. That makes it easier to take in that information. Remember, the design isn't the main idea. The design is to convey the information. Proximity. Are similar items grouped together? You'd be surprised at how often that doesn't happen. Okay, let's take a look. You've seen this before, but remind, which of these would you rather read? One on the left or the one on the right? Obviously, the one on the right. Yes, it's the same information. Is it going to convey the same information? No, absolutely not. I don't want to get something like this when I get your white paper. You don't want to get something like this when you have to read somebody else's example either, right? So take a look at the difference. Does design make a huge difference in whether you get your project accepted and whether people read it? Absolutely. So even though you're in engineering and you don't think design is that important, it very much is if you want people to hear what you have to say. All right, so no daunting, much better, right? Okay, so let's take a look at a design example number 1. This is from a white paper from a student. Some of these all have pros and cons. Again, are there any one particular right way that you have to do it? No, you have to choose the design application that works best for what you're trying to do. And I know I keep saying that, but it's very true that you have to not just look at what somebody else did, but say, how does that work for me? So don't forget to take a look at that white paper overview and the student samples. Remember, those are in the course documents. You'll find those in our webpage itself. There's lots of information, lots of samples, so you can find one that kind of fits what you want to do. So let's see here. This one I want to talk a little bit about the strategic use of color. Notice that it has not gone overboard. We don't have 12 different colors. We just have 2. We have the regular white and black, and we have a very professional and good use of just blue, right? So we have just a little bit up here at the top on the heading, and again on the bottom, notice this page number is a little bit different. It's still in the professional range and also just kind of helps the eye. Notice there's an excellent use of white space. White space, you don't want too much, right? Because too much white space says I don't have enough to say. But you also want some enough to make it worth your while, to make it easy to read, to make the eye be able to convey information. One of the things about this particular example is that it is a single column. The next ones I'm going to show you are dual column. You'll have to decide which one works best for the graphics that you have, the information you want to convey. One of the things about this one that I want to note, they have chosen to integrate the words around the graphic. That looks great here. It also can be one particular problem. If for some reason you happen to be dealing with an audience, or you think that an audience that has hearing capability or impaired capabilities, or might be using a software that reads information to them, this could be a little bit more difficult to embed your images within the paper. So that's just one little thing for you to kind of keep an eye on. Let's see here. Oh, and do make sure you have page numbers, right? Okay, so example number 2. Again, note the strategic use of color. It is not overboard, although the picture of the baby here is very clearly chosen. There's a lot of white space around it, so it's easy to take in. There's some red. We've chosen, remember, we want to follow those CARP, the components of CARP. And this would be, if I start with red in a heading, make sure I follow through all the way red. Don't go blue, red, purple, and so on. You want there to be a thematic consistency, okay? This one is a 2-column paper, and I've chosen this particular one because I want you to see this one has chosen not to justify the right-hand side. I'm going to flip real forward. I'm going to show you, see how this one is justified. Okay, now both of them could be good or bad. Again, it's a thematic thing that you have to figure out once you start putting your information together. Notice the column here has sort of a standard view. There's actually a little bit more around this when we cropped and pasted. For the use of this, we cut off a little bit of the white space. So it's easy to read. Again, we've got a page number. The page numbers and the column headings are in red. They've chosen to do that. There's no one right perfect way. One thing that I want you to note, this particular student has chosen to put their references at the bottom. They call that footnotes. That is not necessarily an IEEE format. However, but the white paper itself is not for an audience that is just engineers. We want to make it accessible, again, remember. So putting your graphic or putting your sources at the bottom of the page as a footnote could be a wise decision to keep that information close. Now, again, do you have information that you need to have close? Well, think about it a little bit and think about what works best for what you need to do. Okay? Let's go back up to this one. Here, this particular student has chosen to do, again, two columns, dual columns, and they have justified it. Notice that just the feel of those is completely different, right? Neither one is right or wrong, and in fact, this one has to, in order to justify it, has to make a wider space between the columns. So you have to kind of figure out what works best. It also makes a difference in where you decide to put your visuals, how the balance of it works. Notice this person has chosen 2 different types of balance. We've got one that they've chosen to put in the middle and one that's down here on the bottom. Notice they're both labeled. That's important. So again, you're looking for a balance of white space and information. Okay, so let's move to the main 3 things that you're going to be working on in this one. Number 1, abstract. What is an abstract? So some of you will do an abstract, some of you will do an executive summary. For this type of paper, it doesn't feel short. This white paper doesn't feel short to you, but this is a fairly short white paper. You probably will not have both because they'd be overkill, it'd be redundant. It's just not long enough to warrant having both. Okay, so what's the difference? An abstract is very brief, it's very neutral, It's allowing your reader to kind of quickly ascertain what is this thing about? What am I doing? Librarians use abstracts for keywords. You've actually searched for those yourself, I'm sure, and found the keywords. The keywords are important to choose wisely, obviously, or when somebody searches for your particular topic, your paper won't come up. Now, length is usually about 100 to 500 words max on an abstract. In this particular paper, tending more toward the shorter end of that because it's a shorter white paper. I'd say the average is probably for this paper, for this type of paper, this size, for this class, I usually get effective abstracts that are about 200 words long, or one really nice sized paragraph that talks about what it's there. Now, you'll find the abstracts in two locations. Usually you'll find it either by itself on a page that's right before the table of contents, or you might find it at the bottom of the title page. Either one of those is effective and fine. Again, look at the way it's constructed and how it looks best. Okay, now an executive summary is completely different. It's much longer, and the idea of it is to allow a reader to understand the entirety of your paper all at one time. It uses a great deal more detail. It's usually about 5 to 10% of the length of a main report. So if you have a 40-page white paper, then you would have a 2-page executive summary. In this class, your papers won't be probably 40 pages long, so you'll probably stick to just 1-page executive summaries. And they'll contain usually headings that sort of mimic the same as the paper, and you want to quickly describe the entirety of what you're doing, varying those headings with the same information, but quick. Let's see. Okay, so you'll go down here. All right, so if you'll have an introduction, you'll see in the sample summaries, you'll see some that have abstracts, some that have executive summaries, some that have just dive right into the introduction. Again, all of those things could be fine. They really depend on how you want to provide that information best. We talked about introductions back at the beginning of the semester when we talked about proposals. But back then, we talked about them being short, succinct, 2 to 3 sentences long. This one is much different. It should be longer. It should be a little bit more of a narrative, not fluffy, not wordy, but accessible. Remember that your audience, you're trying to hook your audience here. You want them to read your proposal. You want them to get into your white paper, right? So you have to hook them and tell them something about what's going on here. We need to talk about the context. Okay, so oftentimes, let's see here, you'll see this. So you might actually remember this from basic composition 1,000 years ago. It's this sort of funnel thing where we begin with a broad explanation or overview of what is the problem, and we narrow it down eventually to a point, the point there, which is this is what this paper is about, and this is how I'm going to address it, the problem, and this is what I'm going to do about it. Okay, so keep in mind that your introduction should be very accessible to a wide variety of audiences, remembering that they may not necessarily know exactly everything that you know, and they might need some context, even historical context, of depending on what your subject is, what's going on, and why you have even bothered to address this particular topic. Okay, so now I go on here. I'm not going to talk about all of these things, but I've given you some sample introductions. If you want to see, like, what does one look like? What does a funnel introduction context look like? I'm going to provide these and let you read them on your own. But these are some good ones. Again, there is no one perfect thing that you have to do. No one perfect introduction. It depends on your particular subject and the audience that you envision it to be. So that's that's lecture number 2. You will be going back and we'll be talking about lecture 1, lecture 2, lecture 3. You'll be talking about these various components, and I will have the transcript for this and also this lecture located in the paper information that you can find in our class. So I will see some of you this week. Remember, the meeting with me, the second meeting, is optional. If you need it, you'll need to want to give me a call or schedule one, and if not, then you can email me with your questions. So see you later.